Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Joy Ravella, and man, I get so excited when I see emails come through to the Everyday Joy inbox. Details again are just under this episode link. Now, I want to read out an email from Jane. Jane is an everyday listener to the Everyday Joy podcast. She said, I've started listening to these amazing podcasts and they are so awesome, all caps. I've just listened to the first one and it's on my favorite Bible verse. I cried as I applied the discussion to my life. And I've definitely noticed a lot of that. A lot of people are discovering the Everyday Joy podcast. They listen to it and they're like, oh, I want more. They go back and binge listen, and I'm all about that. I'd especially love to know which episodes have resonated with you so I can include more of those types of topics in the future. Again, details to get in touch are below, but if you haven't already, make sure you do like, subscribe, follow, and leave a written 5-star review, which again really helps spread the word. Let's get into today's verse.
So let's agree to use all our energy in getting along with each other. Help others with encouraging words. Don't drag them down by finding fault. That is the Message translation of Romans chapter 14, verse 19.
Once again today on the Everyday Joy podcast, the amazing George Pink. One of the things that you are actually quite trained to do, you're an ordained minister, so you've got some really great backing and understanding. And we can look at this verse in isolation, which is a lot about what this podcast is about. We look at one verse, we unpack it, but context is so important. And so I thought maybe the first question for today is something a little different. Could you share a little bit about what's going on around this verse? Why is the author telling people to get along with each other?
Okay, yeah, sure. In this section of Romans, Paul is addressing some quite specific issues that the early Christians at Rome had to work through, right? So he's talking to their context. And he's encouraging these guys to use their energy in getting along with each other. Now, they have some specific differences in opinion about stuff like eating meat at the time, but he's saying that, guys, the important thing is to build each other up. And I like this translation that we're looking at of this verse because it says, help others with encouraging words, don't drag them down by finding fault. He was talking into a very specific context, the very early church at Rome when Christians were a tiny minority of that population. Those words were for them, but actually I think they're words that apply to us too.
Would you say that would be your first impression as well of this verse?
Yeah, very much the same. Just the importance of using encouraging words and building others up. That's what strikes me out of this verse that we're looking at, Joy. And actually, as you say that about the importance of words, I'm remembering that old primary school playground type thing of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. As an adult, I can say, what an absolute load of rubbish. Words are the most hurtful thing. Words are just incredibly potent. They're so powerful. I mean, there's that other verse in the Bible, that the power of life and death is in the tongue, and I think that says it.
I think what jumps out at me is the fact that it says help others with encouraging words, not dragging them down by finding fault. And the truth is, sometimes we genuinely feel like we are helping others by pointing out people's flaws. And that's something maybe you listening right now, that's how you grew up, that's how people spoke to each other in your family and in your circles. But when we really stop and think about it, for me anyway, I don't think I've ever had massive positive impact from someone saying, hey, this is what you're doing wrong, that's what you're doing wrong, that's what you're doing wrong. Honestly, I think it's really discouraged me at times when someone's just sat me down and said, these are all the things you're not good at. So yeah, I think though that this verse does acknowledge that sometimes we genuinely can feel like we're doing the right thing by saying to someone, this is what you're doing wrong. And I think at the right time, at the right place, when you've got a trusting sort of relationship and that person's inviting you to speak into that area of your life, then that can be quite a helpful thing. But otherwise, I think it can be really destructive. George, what do you think this verse tells you about who God is or what matters to him?
Well, I think pretty simply it tells me that God wants to use us to bless others and to build them up and not tear them down. And as I say that, I'm thinking of some other words Paul wrote in another of his letters in Ephesians. He talks about, he says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So I think it's the same idea that he's talking about to the Romans too. It's an encouragement from Paul and ultimately an encouragement from God to encourage other people. He wants us to build others up, and our words are just undeniably a very important part of that.
Yeah, and I know that words play a huge role in the story you want to share with us today about how this verse came alive in your life.
Yeah, sort of hesitating about sharing this, but hey, we're all friends here. I'll dive in, There was a time in my life when I wasn't very careful with my words. I actually used to swear quite a lot, and don't worry, Joy, I can see your face. You don't have to get the censor beep ready for this episode. I managed to leave it behind. I'm not about to drop an expletive on the Everyday Joy podcast. But over time, I guess I came to see that it wasn't such a good idea to be swearing away, and I think that's true. And I'm glad I'm not constantly swearing these days. But it actually occurs to me that using my words in the right way is even more than just not saying bad words, because I think that the encouragement is to use our words in a really positive way. And I could technically avoid all, bad words. I could avoid all swear words. I could use totally clean language, but I could still be dragging other people down with my words and how I'm speaking about them or to them. And so when I hear this verse that we've been looking about, where it talks about using our energy to get along with each other, and as we've been saying, what we say, our words, are a massive part of that. Paul says, help others with encouraging words. So I'm struck, partly from my own experience, and as I think about this afresh, I'm struck with a challenge really to not just avoid swearing, not just use clean language. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I don't do that anymore. But it's so much more than that, right? It's about using my words for good to build others up and to actually encourage people with the way I speak.
I love what George had to say with today's episode around the fact that words aren't just about choosing to swear or not swear. Man, you can say a whole lot by not saying anything. You can say a whole lot by the way you choose to use the word and. For example, and, or, and. I mean, 3 completely different meanings, and you've used the same word. Words are incredibly potent. They are incredibly powerful, and we know that. But how can we apply that to our lives today? Romans chapter 14, verse 19 says, let's agree to use all our energy in getting along with each other. Help others with encouraging words. In the same way you see someone drowning in the ocean, right? And a lifeguard swims out, makes a choice, reaches them where they're at, and extends a hand, extends a dinghy, extends whatever it is that they need in that particular moment. They've got to make significant decisions on the way to rescuing that person. They've got to assess the environment that they are in. They've got to assess the waters. They've got to assess the best way to rescue them. And it might even mean, right, actually, it's not safe for me to get out into the water. I've got to go call for backup and get a speedboat out there. And in the same way, when you see someone drowning around you and you can just tell they're not 100%, instead of slapping on I think you're an amazing person, or slapping on I think you're so cool. I mean, these statements are great, but they only go so far. The times in my own life when I felt the most encouraged by someone was when I really felt that this person saw me. So today's application on the Everyday Joy podcast is all about seeing people before you try to help them. And this is hard to do because sometimes we just want to rescue people. We just want to encourage their little cotton socks off. But we can't do that all the time. Not until we've built that relationship, not until we've understood the lay of the land, because we don't know as much as we think we know. And if we would just take a moment to pause, to invite God into it, put ourselves in that person's shoes, to consider things like timing, tone, tact, the way we speak, who else is in the room, the time of day, we might just then say something that could change someone's life. Now, if you're thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds like a lot to consider. Well, yes, it is. It is a lot to consider, and we should be considering our words in that way because, as George mentioned earlier, they are so potent. I mean, God spoke and the world came to life. That's how powerful words are. So a bit of a challenging message today, but I think it could lead to so many amazing moments that you can kickstart today. Well, that wraps up today's episode on the Everyday Joy podcast. Cannot wait for tomorrow's.